Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Yesterday, we actually pretty much spent most of the time on يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت رسالته والله يعصمك من الناس إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. And of course, we went in a couple details. We went into explaining this ayah right there, balligh, and we said, "O Prophet, balligh." Balligh actually means to deliver the message. ما أنزل إليك, what was revealed upon you. And you want to keep in mind that unzila and not anzala. What's the difference between anzala and unzila? So anzala, the object is defined. Anzala, and then there has to be that the person that did reveal it, the object and the subject, they're going to be there. Okay. But unzila, it's basically by omitting who actually did it. But because it omitted who did it, then it brings it right there and said, Min Rabbik. Now you know that who. So it took out, I guess, the object, but then delayed it to mentioning it from your Lord. And ilayka, upon you. And I think it's worthy of mention. So when you look at unzila ilayka, how are the revelations actually coming to, how were they coming to the Prophet ﷺ? Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. How are the revelations actually happening? So uh, when you're looking at the different narrations, the Prophet ﷺ, was actually getting a number of different ways in how the wahi was coming down. And of course, those ways, some of them, the Sahaba were actually witnessing on some of them. So you had, let's say, Anwa' al-Wahi. I'm going to write there, perhaps we're going to go for this page to really see how al-Wahi, let's see, كان الوحي ينزل in different forms. So yes, we already know that the first one was الرؤيا الصادقة. الرؤيا الصادقة actually means a true vision. What does it mean that it's a true vision? So the Prophet ﷺ would get a dream, just like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam got the dream that he had seen, and he was seeing his son basically getting slaughtered by him. And he comes to his son and says, "Fandur ماذا ترى?" What do you think of the dream? He could have just said, "Well, it's just any random dream, not an issue, nothing to consider of it." But his son knew that his father was a prophet. So he said, "Ya abati fa'al ma tu'mar." Oh, dear father, where'd you get the dear from? Because abati is not it's not just a word, oh father, because abati is a form of tahabbub. It's a form of showing love, a form of showing obedience, a form of showing respect. Do as you are ordered to do. So now you could see that Ru'ya Sadiqa was coming to other prophets as well, and certainly coming to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ would get certain dreams, and sometimes he would come to him, that is al-Wahi, that is Jibril alayhi salam, come to him in actual life, in other words, while he was awake. So let's see. The second one, ينفث الملك في روعه or روعه وقلبه من غير أن يراه. So another way is that al-Malak himself, the angel, would blow, in other words, give a certain inspiration in his heart without even him seeing Jibril alayhi salam. In other words, there would be a certain inspiration. And just like the inspiration in the hadith, لن تموت نفس حتى تستكمل رزقها فاتقوا الله وأجملوا في الطلب ولا يحملنكم استبطاء الرزق على أن تطلبوه بمعصية الله فإنما عند الله لن ينال إلا بطاعته. Another method and another narration where it was an inspiration, when the Prophet ﷺ said, it was given to me as an inspiration. And when you look at ru'i, in other words, it's a sense he recognizes that it's actually coming from the inspiration and not some sense of personal feeling. That no soul will die until it completes the provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed for it. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, then have taqwa, and وَأَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ. أَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ, in other words, work towards putting in, I guess, the effort to seeking the rizq. And don't let you feeling that the rizq is coming slowly to somehow perhaps rush to get your provisions or your wealth or your rizq in a way that is against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For what is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could never get it unless you work through ta'ah, through obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, let's see. The third one, which is something that the Sahaba had themselves witness. They said, أَنْ يَأْتِيَهُ مِثْلَ صَلْصَلَةِ الْجَرَسِ. What does that mean? So he would get the angel and the revelation would come like a strong and a fierce sound of a bell sound. In other words, it's extremely fierce, and that was usually the hardest on him. And the malak would basically, I guess, somehow also come in, and in that situation, the Prophet ﷺ would show certain signs where his own forehead is basically, I guess, getting very sweaty, and even on very cold days. And even if we were to have him sitting perhaps on some kind of a camel or some kind of an animal, it would collapse on the floor. And that's where you could see this hadith that was narrated by Shaykhan. Shaykhan is going to be, or Shaykhan is going to be Bukhari and Muslim. That the Prophet ﷺ was asked, how were you getting al-wahi? And the Prophet ﷺ responded, at times it would come to me like the sounds of, like the strong sounds of bells, and it is the hardest on me. And then فَيَفْصِمُ عَنِّي, and فَيَفْصِمُ عَنِّي, which actually tells you that somehow, I guess it's giving us that Jibril himself somehow, I guess, enters his body, or somehow, I guess, has this direct effect, if we don't want to say enter, but has a direct effect on his body, that he basically becomes inside and not necessarily external, but becomes something that is affecting him from inside, not necessarily that Jibril becomes the Prophet ﷺ, but definitely the Prophet ﷺ is aware of what's going on, but he feels that there's something that's affecting him, let's say it that way. And he says then, وَقَدْ وَعِيتُ مَا قَالَ, and I would know everything that he had said. And sometimes he would come to me, يتمثل لي الملك رجلا فيكلمني فأعي ما يقول. And he said sometimes he would come in a form and a shape of a man, and he would talk to me, and I would be capable of understanding what he was saying. And of course, we do have other narrations where the Prophet ﷺ, let's see here, Ibn Sa'd, and you could see Rijaluhu Thiqat actually tells us that the chain of narration at least has authentic narrators, that the Prophet ﷺ used to say, كان الوحي يأتيني على نحوين, that al-wahi actually means a couple things. It can mean Jibril alayhi salam. Al-wahi could also mean an inspiration, and al-wahi can also mean a fast inspiration or a message, and could also mean a certain sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built within you. Okay, so for example, when you're looking at أوحى ربك إلى النحل, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this inspiration to Nahl, to the bees. This doesn't mean that the bees somehow will get Jibril alayhi salam and telling them what to do. This type of wahi is from the literal meaning of wahi, which means a fast message. So in other words, there's a certain message, there's a certain inspiration, there's a certain, let's call it wired messaging, I guess, built in, let's say a natural built in information within this, perhaps this bee, or it's not just the bee, but just different animals. When you look at, for example, a fish, this fish that's, in order to attract its mate, it creates this beautiful design in the middle at the bottom, the very, very bottom of the ocean. And then the female comes over to see whether this design is perfect enough for our family, and then basically would make that decision. And you would say, same thing. How do birds determine what type of nest to make? How do other animals, what type of burrows? So all of that is wired in by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly the nahla, or at least the bees, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was emphasizing the bees, but it doesn't mean that such wahi is only to the bees. So how is it that bees, they chose, I guess, this, is it called an octagon, or I don't know, the shape, it looks like the stop sign, in order to build their beehive. All right, and why that particular, is it a polygon or is it an octagon? Anyhow, so at the end, how did they determine this shape, and why this shape, and what makes them go for the pollen, and which pollen, and how to identify what queen they're supposed to get, whatever, all these different things. So of course, when we look at, same thing, when we speak about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, so I got the octagon is 8 sides, I know, okay. And okay, Noura, you tell me what what their design is called. And the same thing when you look at Awha, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given wahi for Musa. It doesn't mean that she had become a prophet, okay? It doesn't mean that she had become a prophet, but similarly, as in Nahl, as bees were getting a certain inspirations could also feel that you're given a message. But here's one thing. Oftentimes I would get women coming to me and telling me, hey, I was getting this feeling, and is this a divine feeling? Is this something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell me, etc.? We would say, well, when you want to make decisions in life, when you want to make any of course, these decisions that relate to your life, then in that situation, you're not going to look at what kind of a feeling that you're going to get on the inside. You're going to study the pros and the cons. You're going to study the data. You're going to study, of course, along with your wali, in order to make sure that this person has, let's call it the qualifications to making and enhancing a marriage, and this person is qualified enough, whether financially, religiously, his character. What is that all showing us? Is this showing us that this person is not going to be competent in his, of course, I guess, personality, not competent in his responsibility, not competent and in his decision making? And this is what we need to teach women. It's not an issue of having six packs, and it's not an issue of looking in a certain way, or looking, I guess, in appearance and having some kind of appearance and dressing up in a certain way. No, it's about what were you capable of proving. It seems like animals are right now doing a better job in choosing their mates, and they would make them, hey, you need to build a really good nest, and that's how I'm going to determine whether you're qualified enough to take care of our babies or not. Or that's in the birds world, or even that fish. Oh, you need to make sure that you build the best type of home. It's always focused on the home. Are you capable of securing our babies, securing our home, securing our family, or not? That's the main focus. And in order to see how they're competent, they have to basically put in a certain effort. whether that's in making and building security, showing that he's man enough to defeat the other enemies. And of course, this is in the animal world, but unfortunately, right now we're seeing our girls actually lost in what makes, let's call it, a competent candidate. And of course, they would get a picture and it's like, oh, not my type. And why is he not your type? You just saw a picture. You don't even know anything about the profile, anything about, I guess, of what makes him a person that is right or wrong for you. But you could see that it's basically right now just the appearance that they're focused on and nothing about of what really makes a competent person. So anyhow, so when we're speaking about that wahi, what you're going to do in order to identify whether it is wahi from shaitan or wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the wahi through Jibreel alayhi salam. Not that you become a prophet, but he had already given you the areas to look into, to research, to make sure that you are basically making the right decisions. So the Prophet ﷺ was already there, already sent. He received the wahi, and you just got to do your homework. And through that wahi, you're basically going to determine and study your situation through the lens of such wahi, kitab and sunnah, Quran and sunnah. And as for the other wahi that you probably got a gut feeling, okay, a gut feeling certain sort, it could have actually been shaitan. How do I know if it's a shaitan wahi or because where you, really shaitan can actually, yes, وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said shayateen would give wahi to their followers. Yeah, they would give wahi, yes, they would give them this inspiration. And they would think of this inspiration. And a person that's falling in a delusion would think of the inspiration that's actually coming from shayateen as an inspiration coming from the divine. And that's where, of course, you would see many falling in this confusion. So just looking at that wahi, the Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel يأتيني به جبريل فيلقيه علي كما يلقى الرجل فذاك يتفلت مني ويأتيني في شيء مثل صلصلة الجرس حتى يخالط قلبي فذاك لا يتفلت مني. He said, sometimes Jibreel basically would basically come to him, you know, it's like giving him like it's kind of like a speech, a man to man, in where we're talking to each other. It wouldn't necessarily be as strong. So some of it he might, I guess, fully remember, and some of it you might not fully remember each and every single thing. But the one that comes in a form which is usually al-wahi, that comes as al-Quran, it would come مثل صلصلة الجرس. It would come like a strong bell sound. And he said, يخالط قلبي. He would even, it would be mixed with my heart, in whether it's the words or whether it's the wahi himself, that it would be basically intertwined with his heart. فذاك لا يتفلت مني. And that one would not be something that he would forget. And al-Hafidh, that is al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, and he said, well, what that means and what that is referring to, that was, of course, because before the Prophet ﷺ was concerned that he might forget what was revealed onto him. So the ayah was revealed, لا تحرك به لسانك. You don't have to, and don't move your tongue. Why don't move your tongue? This isn't don't move your tongue as well, you know, you have to never move your tongue. But this is to tell him, you don't, because he would hear the revelation and he would be afraid that he might forget it and not pick up on what was revealed. So he would repeat along the words that are being revealed. So that's when the ayah was telling him, لا تحرك به لسانك. In other words, don't repeat along. Don't worry. It's all engraved within your heart. You're not going to forget it. You don't have to worry about repeating while it's being revealed because you won't forget it. It's not going to be something that you will forget. Let's see. The fourth kind is أن يكلمه الله تعالى بلا واسطة من وراء حجاب في اليقظة كما في ليلة الإسراء. Let's say the fourth one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would talk to the Prophet ﷺ directly, just like Prophet Musa alayhi salam, but behind a barrier. So hijab is not hijab what you ladies wear, but this is a barrier. And he would be fully awake, in other words, know what's happening, exactly like on the day of al-Isra and al-Mi'raj. And it was not, al-Isra al-Mi'raj was not a dream that he got. Let's see another one. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would talk to him kifahan bighayri hijab. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would talk to him directly without hijab. And that is according to some scholars. Not all scholars would agree on that one. And that is based on the opinion that Laylat al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, and one point that the Prophet ﷺ, عند سدرة المنتهى, that the Prophet ﷺ had actually had a direct conversation or a direct vision to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not all scholars would agree on at least on this piece of it. So just to mention that one. Okay, let's see the sixth one. أن يكلمه الله تعالى في النوم. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will talk to him in sleep. Let's say, and there's the hadith, أتاني ربي في أحسن صورة فقال فيما يختصم الملأ الأعلى. That he would get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the dream, talking to him in a dream, and he said that the Lord Almighty had come to me in the best image. And he said, what are al-mala' al-a'la? Al-mala' al-a'la, we're talking about the angels right there. What are they debating about? Don't want to go into that that story, but just realizing what we're speaking about right there. Let's see. Let's go. السابع مجيء الوحي كدوي النحل. What is مجيء النحل? مجيء الوحي كدوي النحل. So الوحي would sometimes come like it's a beehive, like it's the sound of a beehive. And the Prophet ﷺ, let's see, look at this hadith. إذا أنزل عليه يسمع عند وجهه كدوي النحل. إذا أنزل عليه يسمع عند وجهه كدوي النحل. The Sahaba were there where sometimes when al-Wahy would come to the Prophet ﷺ, if they got really close to him, they would hear a sound like it's the buzzing sound that you would get by getting close to a beehive. And this is what it would look like. Let's see. The eighth way, العلم الذي يلقيه الله تعالى في قلبه وعلى لسانه عند الاجتهاد في الأحكام. So some of it is basically an inspiration in knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically inspire him with, and whether it's inspire him, let's say internally, or even inspire him to say whenever he's making a certain ruling. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ is basically infallible, and this in itself is basically a miraculous thing. And therefore the different things that would happen in order to make sure that the Prophet ﷺ stays infallible, because through him is basically an information that is going to be guidance for all mankind throughout history. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give him such inspiration. And of course, what are the different descriptions of al-Wahy? So some of al-Wahy would basically, number one, Jibril alayhi salam, having 600 wings. And, you could see another way is that he would come in the image of Dihya al-Kalbi. Another way is that he had actually come in a shape of a man with very white clothes and very black hair. And it's really interesting. Sayyidah Aisha actually said that she had seen the angel a couple times in her home come in the shape of Dihya al-Kalbi. Dihya al-Kalbi was a famous Sahabi, and sometimes it doesn't have to be Dihya al-Kalbi. So those are some of the things. So just so that we would understand when we speak about nuzul al-wahi and what that means. So Noura is correcting the beehive shape. It's a hexagon. So Jazakallah khairan, Noura. You could see I would basically fail in naming those shapes. So now you know. Okay, so let's continue. يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك. So of course, ما أنزل إليك من ربك, all the different types of wahi, whether we're speaking about the ones that are dreams, or whether the ones that are um, face to face with Jibreel alayhi salam, and or coming to him in the shape of a man, and the list goes on and on. So at the end, it was unzila ilayka min rabbik. At the end, it was coming from the Lord Almighty. And we talked about the different stages of al-wahi. We talked about the different stages of da'wah, and we said that in the beginning it was basically more of a secretive type of da'wah, and he wasn't revealing it because he was fearful from the mushrikeen that they will attempt to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, and basically end up eliminating the da'wah entirely. We also went in details, and we said that this in it, بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك, we went in details about the story of Zainab bint Jahsh yesterday. We also talked about ta'deeb and what that really entails, that it's a type of mentorship, it's a type of guidance, it's a type of discipline, it's a type of helping the Prophet ﷺ and directing the Prophet ﷺ to really becoming a person that, let's say, embraces the details of al-wahi, the details the details of the inspiration, the details of guidance, because he is going to be a prophet to basically guide all mankind. Now, this is important to keep in mind, because the Prophet ﷺ, from early times of da'wah, he was recognizing that he was going to be on a mission that is going to be a global mission, and not necessarily something that is going to be localized within Mecca. So he recognizes that, to the point, let's see some of those signs. When the Prophet ﷺ migrated, I guess that one stands out. I guess, the most right now. When the Prophet ﷺ was migrating to Medina, there's somebody that manages. Of course, they put out this reward. Whoever catches and manages to basically catch the Prophet ﷺ, and it's not dead or alive, it's alive or dead. I don't know why in the English language we would say dead or alive. They want the person dead before they want him alive, but in Arabic, no, it's that they want him hayyan aw mayta. They want him alive or dead. Anyhow, so who manages to get there and manages to reach the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq? It was Surah ibn Malik. Surah ibn Malik manages to somehow get really close, but that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a quicksand happen underneath that man's horse, and he basically gets into this quicksand. And a couple of times, and every single time that he recognizes that this is not something that he's going to be able to do, because there's a supernatural thing that just happened right before his eyes. So then he would promise again that I'll leave you alone. I won't, attempt to kill you or do anything to you. Just, let me stay alive, basically. And he would make the dua, and then the quicksand basically ends. But then again and again and again, until finally Surah ibn Malik recognizes that this was a supernatural thing, that his attempt basically failed because there was divine protection. That's when Surah ibn Malik says, well, can I at least have a different kind of a reward? I'll let you go. I won't, do another attempt, but can I at least have another type of a reward? So the Prophet ﷺ, during that time, and this is key. So the Prophet ﷺ, it was him and his companion, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, attempting to run away because they were in severe danger. And here's Surah ibn Malik, and the Prophet ﷺ was telling him, okay, you will get Suwarai Kisra. What is Suwarai Kisra? It's the jewel for the king of Persia that basically would kind of like a wand, but it's not a wand, a magic wand, but it was a wand. It's a circly wand where I guess somehow it made him feel that that was uh, that was somehow, at a glamorous level, and he would basically have it in his hand and around him, and basically just pointing with it. That was what he liked to carry. So that was Siwara Kisra. They were two, and Suraq ibn Malik was promised to take both of those. What is actually interesting is that Suraq ibn Malik at the time, he recognized that, well, the Muslims don't even have a country. In fact, the leader for that country that he's probably working towards, which is the Prophet ﷺ, is right now really running for his life. How can he be talking about the expansion of a country that doesn't even exist, which is, of course, an Islamic country? In fact, in facing what and speaking about what, it was actually going as far as speaking about defeating the most powerful country at the time, which is Persia. And to actually talk about taking the jewels of Kisra, that in itself is a mu'jiza. It's a miracle to give such type of a prophecy. Well, that's not only it, but to even know that Suraq ibn Malik was going to stay alive to even witness such a thing. It wasn't happening perhaps 700 years from now, but no, you're going to get those jewels. And it was known that Suwarai Kisra were basically going to be given as a reward for Suraq ibn Malik. When the Muslims conquered Persia, and Persia was definitely defeated in the Battle of al-Qadisiyah in the 15th year Hijrah, they all knew, everyone knew that there was a particular promise, there was a particular prophecy that Suwarai Kisra, they belong to Suraq ibn Malik. Straightforward like that, simply, with no second opinion. And it was written by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq because the Prophet ﷺ was an illiterate man. So that was one thing. You could say that this type of wahi, all right, how did the Prophet ﷺ actually know all of this? And it was basically al-wahi giving him that inspiration at the moment. بلغ جميع ما أنزل إليك من ربك, to reveal everything that was revealed on to you. In other words, to basically give it to the people and not hide anything. And we talked about it-ta'deeb, that the Prophet ﷺ was guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, when we're speaking about this guidance, ta'deeb al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even in early childhood. So the Prophet ﷺ, we know the hadith that even when he had attempted to join in certain parties as a young teenager, he would basically be put to sleep and not be capable of joining along those parties. Or even in other instances where the Prophet ﷺ was basically given the guidance. And certainly when we're speaking about, I guess right here, what is coming to me is Zaid, and of course, what's his name? Nufail, Zaid ibn Nufail, or was it Zaid ibn Nufail? Hold on, I'm going to get the name. So that man that the Prophet ﷺ had basically mentioned that he himself was going to be coming in, lined up on Judgment Day, just him alone as a nation. Amr ibn Nufail. Here you go. Here's the name. Amr ibn Nufail. Amr ibn Nufail Amr ibn Nufayl was a man that lived during the time of what is called Ayyam al-Fatra. What is Ayyam al-Fatra? Ayyam al-Fatra is basically the timing between Prophet Isa alayhi salam and the Prophet sallam. There were no other prophets. And during that time, and of course, the Prophet sallam wasn't a prophet yet, Amr ibn Nufayl was in search. There were 4 different, they're called Ahnaf. 4 different Ahnaf. You got Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi, you got Abdullah ibn Jahsh, you got Waraq ibn Nawfal, and you got Amr ibn Nufayl. They were the only 4. Waraq ibn Nawfal, we know his story. Basically, the Prophet ﷺ goes to him, and Waraq ibn Nawfal basically tells him, if لو كنت جدعا, if I were young enough to follow you and basically protect you, because every single prophet that had come with this was fought and people were going to leave him alone. I would have done so. Now, لو كنت جدعا, he could use the word جدعا. It's like if I were going to be strong enough. But of course, he dies later. The other one, Abdullah ibn Jahsh or Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh, he basically was Christian. Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi, he basically had his own story, and it was basically mentioned for Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi. What was he saying? أيها الناس اسمعوا وعوا إنه من عاش مات ومن مات فات. What was he saying? He wasn't necessarily finding any piece of information or revelation that he can find in order to hang on to. So Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi, just by deep ponderance in the world, he was capable of seeing a certain pattern. So he said, أيها الناس, O people, اسمعوا وعوا, listen and comprehend to what I'm telling you. إنه من عاش مات, whoever is living, they'll certainly face their fate of death. وَمَنْ مَاتَ فَاتَ. And those that had died, they had already basically passed. And then it's another pattern. وَكُلُّ مَا هُوَ آتٍ آتٍ. Everything is not going to basically just end like that. What he was trying to say, he said, وَكُلُّ مَا هُوَ آتٍ آتٍ. And what we're seeing through all of this, that it's going to be a pattern where they're not just dead and that's the end of it. In other words, it's not some form of that's basically the end of life. You just are born, you die, and basically nihilism, there's nothing to it. No. كل ما هو آت آت, there has to be something that they're going to be coming forward to. In other words, there's something behind all of this. That's all he could see. He wasn't necessarily coming to something. So he said, Laylun Daj, you could see that we've got those dark nights, Naharun Saj, daylight would come. You could see the pattern. We've got the night coming, Naharun Saj, Sama'un Datu Abraj. We could see the different horoscopes. We could see a certain design that we would come to. We would turn in time, and then we would come to the same point, and we could see it in the skies. That's basically telling us that there is some pattern, there's circling, there's a starting point. You would come back to it again, and then there's the end point. You would come back to it again. He could see that there is a pattern of continuation. And then he would say, ليل داج ونهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج ونجوم تزهر وبحار تزخر وأرض مرساة. No, جبال مرساة وأرض متحاة. So you could see that right around us, that there are magnificent creations, very high mountains, and you could see the earth in some areas being plateaus for us to live on, and what actually had created or made such magnificent creation didn't make it for absurdity. That's what he was trying to get to. Did he get to why it was created? No. He just recognized that there can't be no reason. It can't be just plain absurdity. So he said, ما بال الذاهب رأيت في الذاهبين الأولين من القرون لنا بصائر لما رأيت مواردا للموت ليس لها مصادر تمضي الأكابر والأصاغر. He said, all I could say that those that had lived before us في الذاهبين الأولين من القرون لنا بصائر. I had seen by pondering in those many ages and centuries of people passing, all I could see, تمضي الأكابر والأصغر. The young and the old would die. And from where? Who took them to life? ليس لها مصادر. We don't really know the source of what brings them to death. But we just know that something is behind all of this. That's what he was trying to get to. And that's why he would tell his people, because he was Iyadi, he would say, يا معشر إياد أين الآباء والأجداد أين الفراعنة الشداد. He would tell his people, calling on to his people, معشر إياد, where are the mighty men of the pharaohs? Where did they go? Why didn't they come back? I thought they were mighty. Why didn't they come back? And قصة ابن سعد الإيادي, did he get to an answer? Well, there's no way that he got to an answer, because that answer was going to be outside of the matter that he was seeing. He was capable of understanding that there is a pattern, that there's no way that this is all created in absurdity. He's capable of understanding that piece of it. Amr ibn Nufayl was different. Amr ibn Nufayl, he put in the effort to search and literally go out there and travel. So he goes to the people that were in Syria, Christians, and the Christians tell him, in order to basically be part of that denomination or the Christian group, that he had to accept that there is an interpretation that might be contradicting the text, but he just has to accept that such interpretation, although contradictory to text, that somehow it's going to be divine. And that's it. And that's the same thing that the Jews were telling him, that you're going to have to accept that there's some form of delusion or some form of a, let's say, call it that manipulation, which is reinterpreting the text in a certain way. And you just have to accept that that's part of the faith. Well, the Jews, they basically said something rather similar to that. We know that that's in contrast to the text, but you just have to accept that this is faith. But he didn't accept either, because he felt that, well, if you know that that's not what God is saying, and you're here manipulating yourself, that no, it's going to be faith, and that's okay. He basically said, well, that's the main reason why I had left Mecca and the whole pagan religion. I left it because it was all man-made. Am I going into another form of a man-made religion and then somehow attribute it to God? So Amr ibn Nufayl comes back to Mecca, continuing his search. And what happens in the middle of the way? He basically gets robbed and then killed. The Prophet ﷺ said about Amr ibn Nufayl that he would be, on Judgment Day, resurrected as a nation on his own. Did he actually find God? Did he actually find a revelation? No. He knew that he was in search of the religion of Prophet Ibrahim, but did he actually get anywhere? He didn't get anywhere. He just put the effort. And that's what you want to keep in mind. The effort is what matters, and not necessarily getting to the goal. Just put in the effort. Even if you didn't memorize the Quran, put in the effort. Just sit there and just put in the effort. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just by you putting the effort, even if it might take you, I don't know, hours and hours, you're trying to work on just one ayah. Just put in the effort. You might actually be considered as those that are hafidhin just because you were putting in the effort. In other words, the effort that you were putting in at the time was the effort of those that were, let's call them, masters in that ilm. You just put in the effort. And this is important to keep in mind, that it's not about the goal and getting to the goal. It's about putting in the effort. The sincerity is what will get you to the goal. What goal? The goal is not necessarily becoming a person that has the ilm, but the goal is Jannah. The goal is Jannah. Just keep that in mind. Did Amr ibn Nufayl get anywhere? No, he didn't. He didn't get to knowing the revelation, but he got to put in the effort. But here's one thing. His own son, Sa'id ibn Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, he basically, Sa'id, he, of course, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the Prophet ﷺ had received the revelation, his own son becomes one of the 10 people promised Jannah. What happened? He's like the father. Now, did the Prophet ﷺ meet Amr ibn Nufayl? Did he meet him at all? He did. Just a couple times. What happened and what was the meeting like? So the meeting that the Prophet ﷺ had met him in, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, at the time, he met him and saw that he was avoiding eating from the meat that was slaughtered for the sake of the pagan idols. That's all, there was a very short conversation, very short meeting. And the Prophet ﷺ was inspired by him to avoid eating such meat that was basically slaughtered for the pagan idols. So that was one thing. All right, but any more information? Well, Amr ibn Nufayl himself didn't get anything, but that was basically it. Amr ibn Nufayl lived a type of a dedication. His dedication was whenever there would be these girls that were, I guess, getting prepared, their parents would, or at least their fathers would prepare them for infanticide. He would go to the family and say, I'll buy those girls. He'll take the girls, adopt those girls, and basically spare them from getting killed. And he would take care of them. Once they grow older, if the parents want them back, he'll give them back. If not, well, he'll just at least, give them a chance, a second chance to live, and he'll be the one to adopt these girls. Imagine the amount of money, imagine the amount of effort, the amount of dedication. It's a responsibility. It's a responsibility, but that's what he dedicated himself to do. Just imagine that. SubhanAllah, I actually met a couple Somali women. Somali women are strong, I must admit. I met a couple Somali women, and I'm sure it's not just Somali, but the ones that I had seen were Somali, exceptional cases. They were taking care of many orphans, and some of them would take care of 10, 15 orphans and basically dedicate their lives to it. Would not even get married because they consider themselves, well, I need to dedicate my life to take care of these orphans. And they would take care of 10 and 15 orphans and work towards that and take care of them and all of that. Because, of course, the civil war had basically left many orphans with no parents, no one to take care of them. And subhanAllah, I mean, this is unheard of for a person to have such a dedication and put their life really to just be for these children. And this is something that we would only know in the stories of the noble people. But to have it during our time, yes, you can have it during our time. It's quite sad that we would only think that such stories are only to be heard of during the times of the Sahaba, etc. And we would have to revive such stories amongst us. Why do we have to revive such stories amongst us? Well, number one, Umar ibn al-Khattab, it's not a hadith, but he said, اقضوا على الشر بعدم ذكره. Eliminate evil by not mentioning it. What does that mean? You see, the media, just by bringing stories of crimes and bringing stories of just how horrible this world is and all the bad stuff, what that inspires many to do, even though it is presented that it's trying to keep people away and keep them secure from such things, on the other hand, it does inspire many to engage in such haram. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, it was narrated of Umar ibn al-Khattab that he said, eliminate evil by not mentioning these stories. Like the stories that you would hear about somehow a woman committing zina or a man killing his children or whatever it is, don't mention these stories. So what stories should we be mentioning? The stories of Salihin. This is important. Mention the stories of Salihin to revive piety in you and in the people around you. And that's why you could see that the stories of Salihin, you could see that it's mentioned in the Quran. جاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى. It tells this man came from the farthest area in the city, and he was coming in telling people, يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. Stories of Salihin. Was the name there? The name wasn't there. But it was important for you to know that during the time, and even during a moment where there were no heroes, you know, just like in English, we would say heroes don't wear capes and are not always coming in capes and with wearing capes. And that's the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting you know that such heroes are not always mentioned by their name, but it's by the legacy that they had left behind. It's the legacy that they had left behind. It's what effort that they had put. And oftentimes, the heroes that are mentioned in the Quran, they don't have supporters. They don't have people that somehow agreed with them. They didn't have subscribers. They didn't have followers. They didn't have all these people to somehow pat on their back and say, you did a good job, because they weren't waiting for that. Because they were waiting and only wanting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell them that they're on the right path. That's it. They didn't care what people thought. They weren't looking for social acceptance. Social acceptance is the last thing that they had found. They didn't find any social acceptance. Prophet Noor, did he find any social acceptance? No. It was resistance. It was literally resistance. Musa alayhi salam was literally resistance. That's what they found. They found all of this. They found this rejection, resistance, objection, mockery, all of it. You name it. And that's the same thing. Telling our children that you don't necessarily look for acceptance, but you've got to recognize that the prophets had left a legacy behind, not because they found social acceptance, but because they basically got the acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what matters. This is important. And even the hadith were telling us about the end of times, that there's going to be a time where there's barely anyone seeing or finding any supporters. They're all basically right there, and they're all basically going against al-haq. So right now, We're living at a pivotal time, at a very scary time. Is it before the Dajjal? Is it during the Dajjal? Allahu A'lam. When you look at the stories of a Dajjal, people are somehow connected with some form of information that they're capable of getting instantly. Where Dajjal only stays for 40 days, not really that long. For 40 days, and within these 40 days, massive events happen in the world where everybody is supporting the Dajjal. Well, here's what happens. Dajjal goes to Mecca and Medina. And in Medina, the Salihin would somehow hide and go inside Medina, but then Dajjal and his army would lay a curfew on the people of Medina. You either surrender to Dajjal or you're basically going to get killed. Ladies, guess what the men do in order to protect their women from falling for that narrative that Dajjal is God himself? The men would tie their wives against the beds, against the chairs, against the tables. Don't follow this imposter. He'll take you to Jahannam. But then they untie themselves. And it's the women, majority of those that would untie themselves, go out to the Dajjal, majority of them were women. How can I stop them? How can I convince them? What happened? Ladies, this is important to keep in mind. What is it that's making the Prophet ﷺ tell us majority of those that enter hellfire were from the women, majority of those that would follow the Dajjal were from women, majority of those that would do a lot of fitna throughout times were the women? Why are we susceptible to fitna? That's a question that we have to at least recognize and review, because what matters is that we need to get to Jannah. That's all we need to get to. We want to get to Jannah. So if you really want to get to Jannah, you got to work harder against some of what you're probably wired in, perhaps as a woman, and work harder in order to make sure that you don't fall in fitna. What do I have to do? Should I seek more ilm? Yes, seek more ilm. That's one way to help protect you. What else should I do? Engage more dhikr. Where did you get that from? Well, the Prophet ﷺ actually said while he was meeting with the women, I had seen majority of you go to hellfire. And one lady says, well, how come? Why us? She was confused. And he said, تكثرنا اللعن تكفرنا العشير. تكثرنا اللعن, you're constantly damning things. You would only see in one lens, in one angle, that everything is so dark-sided and nothing is working for you. You're just constantly complaining. You're only seeing this end. And then that basically motivates you to take a different stance and deny even any contribution that anybody is doing good for you. Yes, تكثرنا اللعن, not تكفرنا اللعن. تكثرنا اللعن actually means to continuously damn things and complain about things. تكفرنا العشير, you would deny any gratitude that anybody is perhaps giving you. Your husband, your family, no one's contributing. Your mom, oh, all she could do is just complain. All mom can do is this. All mom can do is this. And then she would deny that her mother invested anything, deny that her father invested anything, deny that her brothers, her family, that anything. And she's constantly living in the mentality that she's nothing but a victim. That's takfurna al-ashir. You're constantly living with that mentality, thinking that you're nothing but a victim. and that you're nothing but living a trauma. And who's the victim here? You're the victim. The trauma, who are the perpetrators? It's basically all the people that surround you. Everybody is somehow the perpetrator. They caused all the trauma that you're living in. And then basically you give yourself that تكفرنا اللعن وتكفرنا العشير. What should we do? He said, you got to give sadaqah. Give up on your dunya. Give sadaqah. Giving sadaqah is going to teach you that dunya and the money that's within it is not what matters. You're giving up on dunya in order to feel and learn that your focus is akhirah. Give up on dunya. Give up on, engage in more siyam. Engage in more dhikr. Engage in all of that. Why? Because at the end, you definitely do less of fasting. You do less of salah by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one's debating on that. But you got to replace it. Replace it with dhikr. Replace it with istighfar. Replace it in another way of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Replace it with talab al-ilm and seeking ilm. Because that's going to revive your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you look at يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت الرسالة, that's basically to tell us that the Prophet ﷺ was just going to give you the message, but it's your responsibility to hold on to the message. وإن لم تفعل, and if you did not do that, فما بلغت رسالته والله يعصمك من الناس. Is this just exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was protecting him from people? Yes, certainly. Can we get the inspiration from it that if you are to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would protect you? So if you are to look at this ayah, يَعْصِمُكَ مِنَ النَّاسِ, this was something that was khas bi-Rasul, that was exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ and not transcending to you. So in other words, if you were to hold on to Islam, it doesn't mean that you're going to get protected. How is it that we're not going to get protected if we were to hold on to? You can face death. You can lose all your money. Wait a minute. I thought the ayah was telling me that Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, for example, was telling فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا وَيَمْدِدُكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ جَنَّاتٍ وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ أَنْهَارًا. And then Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, he was telling فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ, I told them to seek istighfar, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا, he would send the skies basically gushing with waters, in other words, basically giving you the raisins and letting the skies basically flow with water in order to give you more greenery and basically gardens coming in, basically giving you the produce that is coming from underneath your feet. وَيَمْدِدُكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ, and by doing istighfar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase your wealth, increase your children, and يمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا, and he would give you jannat, different gardens, and different anhar, water. And what happened? How can we compare these two? And you said that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that if I were to follow the revelation that was going to be protection, when this ayah is basically saying that we're going to get provisions. How is it that it's not giving me that? Two things. Number one is that in that ayah, it's definitely telling us that istighfar, or relating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that, remember the hadith that we just read earlier, that ta'ah, obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is basically what gets you to the decreed provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already decreed for you. There's no way that you can get the provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for you in illegal/unlawful matters. That's number one. Number two, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed that the ending, or at least what makes a person be in victory, is not necessarily in living in this life. So that's one thing. So a person might fall sick. A person might die. A person might go shaheed. That doesn't mean that that was a failure. In the worldly definition, that would be considered as a loss. But in the lens and by the definition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that no, this is basically victory. What is the victory? The victory is that you got to the rank of Jannah. That's the victory. You got to the rank of Jannah. And this is important to keep in mind, that it's not about getting to what would be considered in this life. Oh, they got the degree, they got the money, they bought a house, etc. No, that's not what gets you to Jannah. It's the effort that you would put in that gets you to Jannah. And that's why you look at in Surah al-Buruj, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ الَّذِي لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. What happened? Did they actually kill them? They killed all of them. They threw them in the fire. That was supposed to be the end. By the worldly definition, they basically were defeated. But by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, these people, they made it to Jannah. They made it to Jannah. So in a worldly definition, or worldly, let's say, I guess, what would we call it? During our time, of course, in life, they might define that as nothing but defeat, nothing but loss, nothing but failure. She lost a job because she refused to take off her hijab. No, she won a rank in Jannah. She lost her money. She lost the privilege of buying a house because she didn't want to go through mortgage. No, she won a rank in Jannah to get basically a bayt fil Jannah. She lost the privilege of getting a husband because she refused to marry a man that didn't have the money, that didn't have the deen. No. She basically, that wasn't a lost privilege of not wanting to marry this man because he wasn't of deen. It wasn't a privilege anyways to marry a man that didn't have a deen or have the deen. That wasn't a privilege. Even if he had the money, yes, even if he had the money. The privilege is to marry a man with deen. The privilege is to marry a man with deen. That's the privilege. Even if he didn't have the money, يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. If they're poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them the money. So what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when you want to look and define successes and privileges, you want to define it based on the lens and based on the paradigms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what you want to define it based on. What is a privilege? The privilege is Jannah. That's the true privilege. So is it possible that a believer can somehow face death or face harm because they're probably seeking to apply the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They can lose a job. It can be possible. Can a believer probably lose a home, and probably because for the sake of akhirah, probably lose even their degree? And absolutely, it's possible. That's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you. How committed are you going to be? That's what you have to answer. So when we look at Wallahu ya'simuka minan nas, this is exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ and cannot be something that be transcended or even be considered that that's what is going to be for anybody that is following the Quran. And we talked about sabab al-nuzul, the reason for the revelation. We talked about that Arabi that attempted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and we talked about the hadith that relate to this. Let's see. قرأ أهل المدينة رسالاته. So what does that mean? So يا أيها النبي يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت رسالته. So you're saying that other قراءات actually read it as رسالاته? So is this a reinterpreting the Quran, or how do you explain this? Okay. So there are different قراءات. This in front of us is رواية حفص عن عاصم. There are different قراءات. 10 قراءات, 14 قراءات. We'll talk about that later. Right now, what we're looking at is basically رواية حفص عن عاصم. There is another قراءة, and you want to keep in mind that these قراءات were recited off the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he himself read it in different ways. And these qira'at, they're basically in certain letters, certain words at times. So it's not the whole entire Quran. No, you'll have a word, for example, just like this one, risalatah, or is it risalatah? But this, or is it, is not to say that it's either this or that, and basically denying that the other one is also a mutawatira. No, they would say, yes, the Prophet ﷺ read it this way and this way. So it's not or to mean it's either this or that. But you see that قراءة أهل المدينة رسالاته, and what's the difference between رسالته and رسالاته? So رسالته, فما بلغت رسالته, that you had not then delivered the message. So رسالته would be singular. رسالاته, so there would be an a right here, that would be messages. Messages. So you could see Abu Amr أهل الكوفة رسالته and رسالاته. But at the end, they all agreed that both are mutawatir. What does mutawatir mean? Mutawatir, that a group of Sahaba heard it off the Prophet ﷺ, passed it on to another group of perhaps Tabi'een, and another group, perhaps another group of Tabi'een, and then of course it became so commonly known. إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. The Lord Almighty does not give guidance to the people that are kafirin, the people that are basically disbelievers. Why not? لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. Well, simple. If a person is choosing the path of misguidance, then there's absolutely no way. If they're taking the path of misguidance, there's no way that they're going to somehow find guidance, because you're going that route anyways. The route that you're driving on, it's going to lead you to a certain destination. Don't expect to live a life of kufr, or live a life of hypocrisy, or live a life of sin, and somehow at the end of the road think that you're going to find guidance. There's no way. That's why you would say in the Quran, إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين لا. In other words, the type of life that you're living is going to determine the consequence and the direction and the destination of what type of life that you had contributed in. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ لَسْتُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ حَتَّى تُقِيمُوا التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. And we mentioned that even though it says قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ, and say to the people of the book, يا أهل الكتاب, O people of the book, لستم على شيء حتى تقيموا التوراة والإنجيل. What is لستم على شيء? Is that saying you're on nothing? What is لستم على شيء? So لستم actually means you're not. على شيء, on anything. What is that entailing? So that's entailing that he's telling them that you would think you have an argument, basically. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying your argument is incoherent unless you would تقيم التوراة والإنجيل, unless you would apply what is in the Torah / Old Testament or what is in al-Injil, New Testament, and وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُم مِّن رَبِّكُم, and what was revealed unto you from their Lord Almighty, that is the Quran. In other words, your argument would be incoherent, and therefore you would basically be living in self-contradiction unless you basically have a revelation that is coherent with one another, that is well-grounded, and you recognize that one, tuqimu. What is tuqimu? So tuqimu actually means two things. Number one, tuqim al-shay means to support. Number two, tuqim al-shay actually means not just to support, but also means that you would practice it, that you would put it into practice. So when we look at قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةِ, for example, what are we doing right now? We're initiating the salah, we're starting the salah, we're putting salah into practice. We're right now, right there, تُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, also support, and of course come in. And so al-iqama would also mean in where aqama shay, to give support. That's why for women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called the men qawwamun ala nisa. They would be the supporters. They would be the ones in power. And this is extremely important to also see the word al-iqama or al-qawama or qama. You've got support. Why do you stand? You stand, and why is it called al-qiyam when you're standing? Because your body is enforcing you / supporting you. And of course, we know it's basically the skeleton basically empowering you to be able to rise. So to be able to rise, whether we're speaking about tuqimu, you also investing in it, you putting in, of course, that commitment. And تقيم التوراة والإنجيل, you would also recognize that that's the foundation of what makes truth. Old Testament / Torah, Injil, the Gospels, and وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُم. In other words, it's impossible. Did the Jews have a problem with Torah? No, they didn't. Did the Jews have a problem with the Injil? Yes, they did. Did they have a problem with the Quran? Yes, they did. Did the Christians have a problem with Torah? No, they didn't. But did they have a problem with مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُم? That is the Quran. Of course, they did. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling them, no, they continue one another. It's basically a revelation that continues the other revelation, and therefore your argument would be incoherent if you did not complete the revelations and connect them together to give you a complete picture of what truth is. وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. That's the same thing. We did this ayah before. Remember, وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ? We did it before. Where was it? Okay, وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ. Where was it? Here we go. وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. We did the same ayah right there, just a short while, 2 days ago. Well, so what does it mean anyways? That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would the same ayat actually be mentioned in the Quran a couple times? Just like فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, repeated 31 times. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. And here it is. وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. Literally the second page. Why? That's a form of emphasis. So is it a repetition? It's a repetition in Lugha Arabiya can be for a number of different reasons. It can mean, based on the context, it can give a new meaning to the context, number one. Number two, it can be a form of emphasis. It's basically telling you, well, now you recognize that just like تُقِيمُ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ, just like it was mentioned before, that if you don't apply this in life, you just have to recognize, ولا يزيدن كثيرا منهم ما أنزل إليك من ربك طغيانا وكفرا. The context of this one is slightly different than the context before. Let's go back to the one before it and see what context we were talking about. ولا يزيدن كثيرا منهم ما أنزل إليك من ربك طغيانا وكفرا. What is the context? Well, the context was the Yahud were saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was stingy in not giving them the provisions. And when the ayat were revealed, letting them know certain information about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they basically wanted to somehow object to it. They objected to it and they basically had exceeded the limit, and they went against the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, went against that in living a life of transgression and kufr. In other words, even when the revelation was revealed to explain to them what they had misunderstood about Allah Almighty, such explanation, they just objected to it. And not only objected to it, but they started mocking it. They started using even a harsher form of rejection to the revelation. And you want to keep that in mind, that sometimes some people, you would give them da'wah, they just go worse than actually become better. And that's the same thing with there are certain people. وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. Even when you want to apply the revelation and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some will want to deliberately, in other words, they will take it upon themselves. What do they want to do? They just want to go against anything. That what is it that they're seeking? يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْكُفْرِ. If you were to say this is haram, that's what they want to go to. Because it's haram, I want to go to it. And then they'll go to it. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, you would see, why is it you would see many of them, when they see what is revealed into the Quran, they would, or at least what was revealed onto the Prophet ﷺ, whether Quran or Sunnah, they would want to go طغيانا وكفرا. For these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تَأْسَ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell him فَلَا تَأْسَ? Remember when in the earlier part of Surah al-Ma'idah, Prophet Musa alayhi salam was sad that his people went the wrong direction, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him فَلَا تَأْسَ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْفَاسِقِينَ. We did that one. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, don't feel the sorrow on الْقَوْمِ الْفَاسِقِينَ. Don't feel sad for them. Sometimes it is necessary for them to go through certain pains in order to perhaps let them find the right path. Some pains are necessary. And here, فَلَا تَأْسَ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْفَاسِقِينَ. Don't feel sad for الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ when they might face the consequences of the choices that they had made. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ was really sad. I'm trying to deliver the message, but they're choosing otherwise. And what is the consequence? Well, طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. They're just going into another level of طُغْيَان, another level. What is طُغْيَان? طُغْيَان is basically a form of transgression. Now, طُغْيَان, ظلم, is basically two kinds. You've got oppression, or ظلم comes in two ways. You would have one, ظلم can be, let's call it a smaller, or let's call it the first stage of ظلم. And then once that exceeds the limits, that becomes طُغْيَان. So طُغْيَان is worse than ظلم, because الظلم is the early stage of it. الطغيان is when a person had exceeded the limit of ظلم, so they would go, perhaps in the beginning, they're probably hanging out with the wrong friends, watching movies, probably engaging in, let's call it, illicit relations with the wrong people. That's طغيان. That's dhulm. Then drinking comes along, and here's drugs coming along. And then a new friend comes along and probably brings something else, gains. And then a new friend comes along, and then this person introduces perhaps maybe haram things and other haram zina things and all of that. And then a new friend comes up. Each one brings something else. There goes what happens. Well, they just engaged in zina, engaged in khamr, engaged in perhaps killing, and engaged in drugs, engaged in all of that. That becomes tughyan. And one leads to the other. One leads to the other. And that's the same thing even with khayr. One leads to the other. Salah will lead you to perhaps a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Siyam is going to lead you to a stronger discipline. Zakah is going to lead you to redirecting your vision of what really matters in this dunya. It brings in inner purification. And of course, Hajj leads you to taking you into another step of recognizing that there's the relationship between you and the masses, the Muslims. And it redirects, of course, you to considering and reviving the relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by taking Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as your example. And of course, the list goes on and on with whatever we're speaking about in terms of whatever type of ibadah and dhikr we're looking at. And certainly, let's look into this one. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ لَسْتُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ حَتَّى تُقِيمُوا التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. This is the ayah that we're doing. Al-Qurtubi said that there are 3 different matters in regards to this ayah. Number 1, he said it was narrated by Ibn Abbas that a group of the Jews came, or they had come to the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, don't you admit and confess that Torah is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he said, absolutely. So they said, well, we believe in it, and we don't believe in other than that. So that's when the ayah was revealed that you would not be on anything in terms of faith until or unless you would apply what was revealed into the 2 books, that is believing in the Prophet ﷺ and certainly acting upon what was revealed in such revelations. Let's look at this one. You could see that the references, you could see they didn't have necessarily a chain of narration and tell us exactly what that chain of narration and its level of authenticity is. Let's see. Let's continue to point number 2. وَلَيْزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِن رَّبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. He said what that means is that this would increase, in other words, the revelation itself. It would, for some, the revelation would increase in the transgression, not in al-iman. How does that happen, though? Why would anybody get the revelation, but instead of becoming believers, they would become disbelievers? So should we stop giving them the revelation because we don't want them to exceed the limit? How do we understand that? So 2 things. Number 1, ilm itself, in order for it to affect the person, there has to be amal. Okay? Al-amal, action, brings in ilm. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيَعْلِمْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have taqwa, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the ilm. Ilm is also 2 kinds. There's the ilm that relates to dunya. You're learning biology, learning, I guess, chemistry. That's the ilm al-dunya. But ilm that leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's basically ilm that we're talking about. Okay? If the person doesn't apply that ilm, or the person is living a lifestyle that is contradictory to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically regarded as what leads to guidance. What happens? Well, what's going to happen is that this person, because of the life that they're living, they're just so indulged in it that it has a gravity, that the gravity of this lifestyle, the gravity of hawa, the gravity of desire, the gravity of this dunya will suck them in, and you have body, heart, and mind. Whatever force you put into any of those, it becomes stronger. Let's actually draw that one. So you've got body, and you've got heart, and you've got mind. And you only have a certain ability to focus on one. You can't focus on all three altogether, except perhaps in salah. In certain things, you can probably let the three engage together. So when you're looking at, let's say, the body, you're engaging and you're just feeding the body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, there's one thing that can make such feeding be something that also feeds your ruh, your spirit, and be something that feeds your mind. And that's where, of course, you got to look at what you're eating. For example, okay, taking food as an example, what you're eating, what you're doing. Is it going to be, and therefore, if, for example, you're eating pork, it's going to start feeding your mind in a way that's going to basically deprive your spirituality of certain things. You know, our body is very complex. Our body is very complex. So that's why you look at, yesterday I was listening to this podcast, and it was talking about how exercise and how different things in terms of course, activity, physical activity, would basically show us the statistics that people that break their hips, the statistics are showing us that they don't live past 15 years. But how's that related to anything? It's not the heart, it's the hip. But we could see that there are certain things that relate to the body, that if you were to feed the body, that's going to affect our mind and therefore affect the spirit. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us. That if the person is feeding the body, perhaps entertainment, perhaps just a type of joy, they're just feeding it, they're just constantly just giving it that dopamine, what it's going to affect is going to affect their ability to get the ilm. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, you want to get the ilm, you want وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيَعْلَمْكُمُ اللَّهُ. You want to get ilm. You want to let ilm go farther than just a piece of information to enlightenment. Well, fair enough. You want that ilm to go from just a piece of information to enlightenment, in other words, affecting your heart and affecting your spirit. Well, you got to make sure that you're practicing taqwa on your body. That's how you would apply it. By practicing taqwa, you're going to see that it's inspiring and it's affecting your mind and it's affecting your heart, and therefore it all comes together. And that's the same thing. For those that are feeding their body, what that would increase in them, that because they're constantly just feeding their body, their mind and their heart is weakened. And that's why وَلَيَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُم مَّا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِن رَّبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. So understanding this whole idea of how and what really happens. Same thing when you look at Qawm Lut. Qawm Lut, did they actually have a civilization? Obviously. Believe it or not, Ibn Khaldun actually mentioned something that's really rather interesting. He says when people and societies, when they get all the necessary things for living, that's when they would look and seek entertainment. So if their income is stable and they have good health, then they start seeking different ways. If everything's stable right there, they start looking for different ways to grow and expand in their dunya. But the people that have some form of deformity, the people that are, I guess, less privileged in terms of wealth, they would put in the effort to sustain their life, so they would be focused in perhaps getting their life and their bills covered and all of that, I guess, sustained. They don't have time for entertainment. Who are the people that have time for entertainment? The people that have time for the entertainment are basically the people that have all the privileges already there. And that's what Ibn Khaldun says. Ibn Khaldun, and looking at, I guess, what happened to the different societies, whether Muslim or not Muslim, by the way. Same thing when you're looking at non-Muslim societies. When you would see the different societies throughout history, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about Qawm Ad. Did they have a civilization? They certainly did. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, تَنْحِتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا فَارِهِينَ. What did he say? Well, he was talking about that they were engraving, carving their own homes within mountains. In other words, they had such magnificent architecture that they were capable of putting in some form of physics and science and be able to build homes that are strong enough by carving within the mountain. Is that civilization? You better believe it is. It's a civilization. You look at Petra in Jordan. That's a magnificent civilization. You look at the pyramids. Magnificent civilization. What happened? Well, when a civilization happens, many times when they would have the privileges met, that's when they seek different ways of entertainment. Think of the people, the Pompeii, when everything was going smooth. That's when, of course, they started building places for prostitution and places. It was just a city, just really nothing but sex. And that's the same thing with Qawm Lut. Qawm Lut, they did have a civilization. And after everything was mad, that's when, because they had the money, because they had certainly, I guess everything was going fine for them, that's when they went for, of course, homosexuality or sexual aberration. They went for that. It didn't necessarily stop at them practicing it, but no, they were enforcing it upon others. Lut, you don't accept our way of life, quote unquote. What are we going to do? What we're going to do right now, we're going to expel you out of the country because you're right now becoming a threat to our way of living. You're becoming intolerant of our actions, of our choices, of what our life is dependent on, and therefore you are going to basically be expelled. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to leave at a certain time. Why? Because just as they had flipped their fitrah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to flip them and flip the whole society right there in a punishment. Now, having that being said, is that also the same as Muslims? Absolutely. Even the Muslim society in Al-Andalus, when the Muslims were living in this extravagance, Ibn Hazm would describe such extravagance where they had the money, they had beautiful gardens, they were considered, Las Vegas was considered a place of light, it was considered, or a place of activity, a place where everything's abundant. They had the gardens, etc. They were ruling an area that basically was all about providing the different resources. Everything was provided. That's when they went into another form of fitna. The Muslims too? Yes, the Muslims too, they went into a fitna. And that's what actually led to the loss of Al-Andalus. They lost their relationship. What happened? They basically started living in fitan. And that's basically whether for Muslims or not Muslims. وَلَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. Some people, when you could say that if they are distant away from the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their life is away from the life of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what is going to lead them to basically exceeding the limit. الطغيان. طغيان, exceeding the limit in their choices, exceeding the limit in their path, and kufr, and it's going to take them into kufr. So how do I maintain the path and make sure that I don't get there? Number one, you need to always enhance your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do I know how to enhance my connection? Ilm and talab al-ilm is key. There's no way. You asked, how do I know? Well, to know something actually means to study, actually means to create a bond between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's basically giving you that information. To create such a bond, it's not enough to just learn about it as if it's a degree to get, but it's also something that you have to create new relations, new friends that you're discussing such ilm, friends that are giving you a vision of how you can relate to such ilm. You need to create a new society. Give up on a certain group that you're probably relating, especially women. And ladies, especially women. This is not at all somehow being misogynist. No. This is not. I'll be speaking against myself if I'm here, just attacking women just because I'm a woman just like you. I've got 3 children. I'm married, and I'm living a life of a woman just like you are. But this is looking at the ahadith, certain things that we have to be mindful of. Certain ayat are telling us that we have to be mindful and careful of something. Here are a number of questions. Sisters are asking, let's see, did the Prophet ﷺ ever generalize or make a generalized statement directed to men as the reason they entered hellfire? Well, most of the hadith are actually talking about, most of the ayat are talking about men. Fir'aun, wasn't he a man? Haman, Harun, weren't they men? They were men. So it was more directed at men. Abu Lahab, wasn't he a man? Abu Jahl, wasn't he a man? So definitely you're talking about, there are a lot of these statements, okay, that we're talking about the men. So doesn't mean that this is to say this is exclusive to women, and that if it's a man, oh, you're fine, you're just going to make it big. Why? Because you're a man, huh? Don't worry, you're safe. No, absolutely not. All the ayat and all the hadith were more directed at men, and the generalized statements that were basically speaking about women were basically directed, telling the women to, I guess, pay attention to something. This isn't some form of telling men you're okay, you'll make it. Yeah, you've got it within your DNA that you're basically guided, so you're okay. Yeah, nothing to worry about. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. All the ayat and all the hadith were speaking about how many men were actually the leaders, and certainly the leaders of kufr too. So this is not to tell the men that they're going to make it at all. Okay, let's see. How should a person convince himself that whatever he's doing will not go wasted, rejected, and will have no worth? Well, I mean, at the end, a mu'min lives between al-khawf wa raja, between fear and hope. All right, what does that mean? You live in fear that you're fearing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might punish you for the sins that you had committed. And you would hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He would forgive you. So we're living in between these two sides. So a mu'min enhances whenever they're probably prone or feeling excited to commit a certain sin. You would basically enhance the area of fear and say, oh, be careful. You got to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, there's Jahannam, there's uquba, there's this. You're going to lose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepting you, etc. What are you doing? You're basically enhancing that moment. If you're living at a moment where you feel the regret, regretting a certain sin, then in that situation, what are you going to do? You're going to strengthen that feeling that I've got my hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, if I am really sincere that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive me, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will basically give me that acceptance. Which is why this ayah right there, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا والذين هادوا والصابئون والنصارى من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وعمل صالحا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Why did it say that after this ayah? Because he was saying, well, ya Ahl al-Kitab, you won't be on anything until you would be living in incoherence, until you would apply what was in the Quran, in other words, all the revelations. But then it basically goes on and says, Inna alladhina amanu, those that had believed and those that were Christian or Jews, Christians, the Jews, and of course the Sabi'un. Sabi'un are basically well, they're not Zoroastrians, they're Magians. And the Christians are the ones, man amana billah, those that had believed in Allah and Judgment Day and done what is righteous, then there's no fear on them and they would not be feeling that sorrow. So wait a minute, you can be a Jew and actually do what is righteous and believe in Allah and Judgment Day and you're safe? No, that's not what this ayah is saying. This ayah is saying those that had believed, if they had a history of being Jewish or being Magians or being Christian or any other faith, if they are to believe in Allah, believe in Judgment Day, amila salihan, as prescribed in what was revealed onto the Prophet ﷺ, and as prescribed in the revelation, in the final revelation of the Quran, then those are the people that would not find fear and would not be in sorrow. But you just said we're supposed to be living in fear and hope. How is that even? I thought why are you contradicting yourself here? No, wait a minute. لا خوف عليهم. As a human being, it's part of our nature that we fear the future. It's part of our nature. We're afraid. What's going to happen to our children? What's going to happen to me? Is my husband going to get married? Is my son going to make it? Is my daughter going to be a good daughter? Is my daughter going to be this? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to... What happens? We're living in some sort of fear for the future. Why? Because we're so connected to the dunya. It's part of our nature as human beings. It's part of our animal nature that we're afraid of losing our life, losing the resources that make us alive. So we're fearful for the future. So what happens? We're living in this khawf. But for a mu'min, they recognize that this dunya is not going to be the permanent stay for them. So they would not live in this type of trauma or fear for their future because they recognize that their future is not this dunya. Their future is focused on the akhirah. So what happens in their future, what happens to their wealth, what happens to their life, what happens to their health, that's not what they're afraid of because they know that this dunya is just a jisr, it's just a bridge to the akhirah. So the fear that they're living in terms of future or in terms of this life, they know that the one to control all their matters is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for a mu'min, they live recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe in Allah and I believe in Judgment Day and I would do al-amal al-salih. I recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give me that security. Why would anybody not do amal salih? Why would anybody not do what is pious? Because they would think that the only way to getting the privilege is perhaps doing something haram. If only I would rob a bank, I would make the money. That's the only way. I would have to rob the bank. I would have to steal. That's the only way for me to get rizq. Otherwise, I'm going to be doomed to hunger. I'm going to get basically into some situation. It's going to be a place that's going to take me into a different life. So what is that? It's basically living in fear. And what happens? This fear pushes that person, because they denied basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and al-yawm al-akhir, that pushed them into letting go of al-akhirah. You got to connect all these points together. Okay? وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. What is al-huzn? Al-huzn is usually the huzn of the past, the sorrow, the trauma from the past. Once upon a time, I lived this, my husband did this, my mother did this, my father did this, my friends did this to me, or I did this. And what is the person living in, whether it's guilt, whether it's trauma, or whether it's worry of the past and something that happened. So for a believer, they recognize that justice will come. They recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't make this life be this place that is going to be the permanent stay for them. So what do? They connect themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and al-yawm al-akhir. They recognize that this isn't the last and end of everything. So that's why they would live in a different type of fear. What fear? Their fear is the fear for basically designated on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and yawm al-akhir. They fear Allah and they fear they won't make it in al-yawm al-akhir, and therefore their fear in dunya is minimized. They minimize the fear of dunya and they let their real fear be right there, focused right there, Allah and yawm al-akhir. That's a mu'min. So that's why if you basically let your fear be concentrated in dunya, you're going to see that your fear in Allah and yawm al-akhir is minimized. Think of it as, the camera. The camera, you would basically make, if you zoom it, you put let's say your camera, you put it on portrait. It basically focuses on whatever, let's say, that is in front of it, and then blurs everything in the back end. And that's the same thing. You can do it the other way, where you're, of course, making the focus on one end, but you're blurring the other image. That's the same thing. If you're focusing your vision on dunya, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and al-yawm al-akhir is going to be blurred in your vision. But if you focus on al-khawf being on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and al-yawm al-akhir, you will see that the fear in this dunya is going to be blurred and you're not going to be afraid in this dunya. Why? Because you recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's controlling everything, nothing to worry about. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And they would not be living in the sorrow or sadness. Why not? Because they basically are living in the hope for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically tells us, well, how do I actually live this connection? He said, لَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهِمْ رُسُلًا كلما جاءهم رسول بما لا تهوى أنفسهم فريقا كذبوا وفريقا يقتلون. Well, others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken, what is al-mithaq? Covenant. He took it upon Bani Israel and he sent them different prophets and messengers. Every time they would get a prophet or a messenger, which of course, لا تهوى أنفسهم. They regarded that their own hawa, their own desires were basically the center that they judged on. So they would basically consider using their hawa as the compass to determine who to accept and who to reject. So what they then attempted to do was silence by killing the different prophets. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us to the other part. وَحَسِبُوا أَلَّا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً فَعَمُوا وَصَمُّوا ثُمَّ تَابَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ ثُمَّ عَمُوا وَصَمُّوا وَصَمُّوا كَثِيرٌ مِّنْهُمْ وَاللَّهُ بَصِيرٌ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They thought that حَسِبُوا أَلَّا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً. What happened? They basically thought that that's it. It's just going to be what happens. It's just going to be that's it. There's no way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would accept me. That's the answer to the sister's question. So what happened? They basically amu wasammu. What is amu? Amu, they were blinded from seeing the truth, blinded from seeing the path. Sammu, they were even deaf from hearing the message, from hearing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثُمَّ تَابَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. Now, this isn't that thumma right there. There's something missing. What is missing? This is basically to tell us that they engage in fitna and then they seek repentance. ثُمَّ تَابَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يتوب عليهم? He basically sent the revelation, sent the Quran in order to let them know that there's a place of guidance. ثُمَّ عَمُوا. What happened? Then they fell in fitna again. So there's right there this missing link of what happened. It's not missing to mean it's missing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that then they fell in fitna again. Then they were blinded again. And they were deaf again. And many of them lived this life of staying away and far away from guidance. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَاللَّهُ بَصِيرٌ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ. But He's capable of seeing. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give tawbah to these people that had lived where they were blinded and deaf from hearing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ثُمَّ تَابَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, then there is always room for tawbah, and a person is supposed to be living, minimizing the fear of dunya and letting their fear for akhirah be the place of concentration. And then minimizing their sorrow for dunya and living in hope that there is going to be the happiness in akhirah. So they're living in that khawf and the raja. Let's look at, I know there are so many questions. Let's see. How should we look at the sin of Musa alayhi salam, although murder was not intentional, but he didn't hand over himself to the police? I'm unable to understand why he didn't surrender to people, even though Allah forgave him, but the compensation, please correct me. Let me see the real picture. Maybe I'm missing a large part of the story, and also qadarullah, predestination. How should we understand it? So the police itself, first of all, the person that he had killed was actually one of the police, okay? And the police wasn't a police to ensure justice. The police was there to ensure the Fir'aun's governance. So there's a difference. And when Prophet Musa alayhi salam had killed that slash quote unquote police, it wasn't policing. And the reason why he basically killed him, well, it wasn't intentional, but he was right there attacking the whole idea of injustice that this whole policing was there to protect. What was that police trying to do? Well, that police was attacking that man of Bani Israel because he was of Bani Israel. So he was really wanting to enhance the governance of the Pharaoh. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind, that the police wasn't there to ensure justice. And within that context, the police, that officer, was there to enhance the governance of that Pharaoh. So he was seeing that man of Bani Israel as an outlaw to what? To the governance of of that Pharaoh. Okay, so just to keep that in mind. So it's not that he was an outlaw and he was committing basically an outlaw in terms of making justice. It wasn't an issue of justice at the time. It was an issue of injustice. It was an issue of injustice. Prophet Musa alayhi salam, although the killing that he had committed was basically not intentional, but Prophet Musa alayhi salam was at the moment seen as a threat to the autonomy and the authority of Fir'aun, okay? And not to somehow injustice. So that's why Prophet Musa alayhi salam fled, because he was going to be attacked as a threat to the power of the Pharaoh. And certainly Prophet Musa alayhi salam was already going against the whole governance and monarchy for Fir'aun, and by now killing, of course, one of his soldiers, that was going to be seen, and he recognized that was going to be seen as taking that threat, that opposition to the Pharaoh at a second level. That was waging a war. That was considered waging a war. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam recognized that wasn't going to be seen as, okay, did you do this intentionally? Did you not do this intentionally? The Pharaoh was going to right there take it as, now you're waging a war on me, and therefore it was going to be taking it to another level. And of course, the Pharaoh is the one that is right now in power. So he was not going to second thought, of course, dealing with Prophet Musa alayhi salam as right now nothing but committing treason, because that was attacking his power in what resembled the Pharaoh's power, which is that police officer, you killed him, therefore you're ready to attack me too, because you went against me. So it wasn't seen as somehow just a personal mistake. It was considered an attack on the governance of the Pharaoh, and certainly that was to answer. I hope I explained the picture. Okay. Let's see, how should one convince himself? Here's another question. How should one convince himself that whatever he had done, he will not be rejected? Answered that question. Okay, here's another one. If a person is in possession of jinn, or if he's not able to lead a normal, healthy life due to mental illness, does that mean he's not as respectful as other people and is not at a loss and has no value in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How should he perceive himself in this situation? This is a question that we would call murakkab here. Okay. So number one, is possession, is this real or not? Differences of opinions between scholars. Can the jinn actually possess a person and actually control the person? Differences of opinions between scholars. Why so? Well, because the shaitan in Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he says, وَمَا كَانَ لِي وَمَا كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ إِلَّا أَنِّي دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ لِي. I didn't have any power over you, but I called you. In other words, I gave you that inspiration, shaitani, diabolical inspiration. You accepted it, you took it in, and that was the key to control you. Okay, that's the first thing. The other scholars said, no, it is possible that shaitan can control and can have an impact on the person. Why would they say that? They said because in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was inflicted with sihr and with magic, that the Prophet ﷺ, that he used to think that he was approaching his women. In other words, it was some form of hallucination that was happening. They said if it was a form of hallucination, then therefore it can happen that the jinn can somehow affect our ability perhaps Maybe one day they'll be capable of seeing that what was diagnosed or seen as psychosis is actually a part of an influence from jinn, or at least some of it is a jinn influence, and not necessarily all a chemical imbalance in the brain. Are we going to be capable of getting there one day? Although kind of really is scientifically impossible for us to actually get to that conclusion. Why? Because science is based on studying matter. And jinn they're metaphysical things. They're not matter. There's no way that we are going to one day find jinn somehow in some kind of a lab or some kind of an MRI scan. That's impossible. Why? Because these scans and what our brain designed different tools that were capable of finding different things in matter, what we're capable of seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Or at least we recognize that those are things that we're capable of, at least, let's say, dissecting, or at least measuring, or at least finding. But jinn is outside of all of those measurements. So it's going to be scientifically impossible for us to somehow measure jinn one day and see, well, this is the amount of jinn power there is in this person that's mentally ill. This is the type of jinn that is in this person. That's impossible for us to scientifically find. But even if we were to look at text itself doesn't give us any information in how we can diagnose jinn influence and what classification, whether that is jinn, whether that is sihr, or whether that is hasad. There's no text that would give us, well, here's the diagnose, here's the prescription, and here's what you could do, and here's, I don't know, the exercises that you could do. There's nothing of that sort. So you could see that a lot of what was mentioned about jinn and influence and all of that was more anecdotal than let's call it finding evidences through the text. What do we mean by anecdotal? In other words, it's more experience. So you'll find some maybe qari, he'll basically say, well, when I was reading these ayat, this person was showing such behavior, and this is what I did. I gave them honey and put habbat al-barakah, and I put, I don't know, whatever it is, and basically read this ayah on them, and it cured them, and it helped them, and etc. And this person was cured. And another person, well, here's what I did. I gave them some pomegranates, and I mixed it, and I basically minced it, and I mixed it with habbat al-barakah somehow, and it worked. And yeah, they felt some pain in their abdomen for a couple days. It's more anecdotal than anything of text that we could find to tell us that, yes, this is jinn related, or this is hasad related, or how we would cure it. Is this at all finding any resource to tell us, yes, mix this, and this is what you will get? Believe it or not, most of those are actually either fabricated ahadith or weak ahadith where they actually have no resources, no valid resources whatsoever. Really? Yes, no valid resources whatsoever. So how did they basically say that that's permissible to do? Well, they based it on a hadith that's in Sahih Muslim. لا بأس بالرقى ما لم يكن فيها شرك. As long as there's no shirk, it's permissible to do. So some actually said, yes, it's لا بأس بالرقى, there's no shirk. I'm using these things. I'm reading Surah al-Fatiha on it, and therefore I found cure in it, and it worked. And hey, this person is doing fine right now. I'm like, okay, well, if it helped, good luck. But do I have any evidence to support that? The evidence is no. So Now going to the second part of the question, does that mean they're not as respectful, mental health, etc.? Well, it's not that they're respected or not respected. There's a difference. If I'm taking this case in front of me, what does it mean to be respected? It basically means when I'm talking person to person, definitely they have to have their honor. They have to have their rights respected. It depends on the context that they're put in. But if this person is basically not showing competence to probably be witnesses, then I have to consider justice as my main focus right there and my priority, and not necessarily this person and say, well, I'm going to accept everything that they're saying just to honor them. I have to honor justice at the expense of someone showing, let's say, incompetence to basically having a mental awareness of what's happening. So is it showing a sign of disrespect? No, it's not showing a sign of disrespect. It's the data is showing that this person is not competent to be a witness in this situation, or perhaps teach me about certain things, or perhaps competent to basically perhaps take and carry on a certain role. Am I showing disrespect by telling somebody, sorry, but you don't have a degree in pharmacy and I can't take your prescription, and therefore we can't hire you to be a pharmacist? That's not showing disrespect. That's basically putting things where they belong. And that's the same thing. If somebody is not showing competence to be in a certain position, that's basically putting things in where they belong. If you're not qualified, whether mentally or whether educationally or physically, I have to recognize that our society's priorities are considered to us more important than how you feel as an individual. Because المصلحة العامة مقدمة على المصلحة الخاصة. The society's care to us is more important than your individual, I guess, feeling. If you think that somehow you're a doctor and that you're qualified to treat people, but then you're actually not a person of a medical degree. If you don't have a medical degree, then I'm sorry, but I'm not going to put you because somehow you feel qualified. I'm going to say, oh yeah, this person feels qualified, therefore I'm just going to accept them and I'm going to give them this opportunity to treat people. No, if this person is not qualified to treat people, المصلحة العامة مقدمة على المصلحة الخاصة. What if this person went into depression because somehow they were hurt? By all means, that's a different treatment that they can face on their own. We could probably give them some therapy on how they could face, I guess, the denial that they were basically getting from our rejection. But المصلحة العامة is, to us, making sure that people are getting the right treatment, the right services, is to us coming in priority. They can't live in this entitlement that, yes, people are supposed to accept you. No, it doesn't go like that. Let's see. How should one perceive himself in this situation? Well, it depends on, of course, the situation that they're living in. If they're mentally ill, then that situation, recognize that, hey, you need treatment. It's okay. Get treatment. Get the necessary means to help you, the resources to help you, in order to recognize, sometimes you just have to know that you have cancer, you have schizophrenia, you have this mental illness, and you have to face the reality. You need treatment. You need medications. You need therapy. So how should they perceive themselves? It's okay to recognize that you're ill and that you need help. There's nothing wrong with it. And just recognize. So should I see myself as basically sinful for this? You're not at sin for being mentally ill. You're not at sin for being mentally ill. This isn't a sin. But this is something that is a challenge. This is basically a challenge, or let's call it a fitna or a hardship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like a person can get cancer, it doesn't mean that this is a result of a sin that you had committed. No, if a person gets cancer or a person gets into some kind of an evil consequence, it doesn't necessarily have to be as a result of something that they had committed, but it can be as a challenge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might put them into. So therefore, to see through that lens that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can inflict certain pains on people, and such pain, whether it's mental illness, physical illness, financial regression, or social, challenges, that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we're supposed to, one, seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us, the way of solving the problem, and two, seek the treatment that is known to us, that is necessary, and basically recognize that this life is not the end of everything, and that we recognize that whatever pain ma asaba Muslim, every single Muslim, whether it's asabu al-wasab, pain, or perhaps any illness, or perhaps poverty, etc., all of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you are patient about it, and that you seek the ways to give it that treatment and healing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give you the reward for it. The reward for being mentally ill, yes, the reward for being mentally ill and being patient and taking the treatment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's it. He'll give you that. Does Amr ibn, Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, will he be resurrected on Millat Ibrahim? Yes, he will be resurrected on Millat Ibrahim. Let's see. Bullying, making fun, trying, and if a scholar interprets like a person is possessed by Hindu jinn, you will have some people that will present themselves as shuyukh, and you want to be really careful with that word, because many imposters will put on a cloak of religious figures, because that's the way that they can eliminate the true reality of what they are as imposters. So you want to be careful how many present themselves as people of religion, people of divine connection, because they don't want to reveal the reality that it's not a diabolical, or let's call it a shaitan connection. So they present themselves as a divine connection. And you want to be careful with a lot of those raqis, because 99.99999% of them are nothing but imposters, and they're just basically using and abusing the people's ignorance, and they're abusing people's search for hope and search for cure. So they would give them some information that there's no way to verify that information. There's no way. So for example, they'll tell you, hey, this person is basically possessed by a Hindu jinn. How am I going to verify that he's Hindu? How do you know? Well, there's no way that you can verify it, because he can't even verify it either. But he will abuse that you are in search of answers, in search of hope. So he'll give you some information that there's no way to verify it. give you this general information. Oh, this person is somehow possessed by a Hindu jinn, and then therefore you would have trust in this person. Well, if he was capable of knowing that he's Hindu, that means he's capable of giving me even more information, because he gave me some information that I'm not capable of verifying or knowing. So you would put more trust in this person. And this is how imposters play the game. They would usually give you this information that you're not capable of verifying. And you want to be careful from these kinds of people. So it's not a scholar. No, they presented themselves as scholars, because that's the game that they would have to play, to present themselves as scholars, present themselves as shuyukh. But there is nothing in the books of fiqh, in the books of hadith, in the books of tafsir, where it gives us any form of any detailed information of how to verify the type of jinn, the type of, the spell and where it is and all of that. There is no and nothing of that sort in the books of fiqh, the books of tafsir, hadith, Quran, you name it. There is nothing of that sort. Nothing. So that so-called scholar, if he's telling you and that, yeah, there's a Hindu jinn in that person and the spell was done in order to let that girl not get married, and Auntie Fulana somehow did that spell and she took this much money, this is an imposter. Plain and simple. There's no, how did you get that information unless you're the one that's dealing with the jinn yourself? Simple and straightforward. This person is not a scholar. This person is putting on a cloak of being a scholar, and I guarantee you, this person can't even read the Quran right. There's no way. But this person will wear a beard, put on a cloak and a turban, and somehow say words that you cannot understand and make you think that this is far beyond your ability to comprehend. Only he can understand, and only he, through divine connection, was capable of getting. And therefore, you must trust this person, because there's no way that you can get to the light and the knowledge that he's getting. So you would surrender to him, giving him all your wealth, giving him all your belief, and giving him all that faith, because these people would, let's say, prey on people's hopes, on people's worry, on people's fears. So that's why you would only see, you would only see the people that have the ilm, and the people that have, let me say, the ilm to understand the scope of this ilm. Knowing the scope and knowing the parameters of this ilm is part of ilm. How far can these scholars really know what we're supposed to be doing? This learning the scope of this ilm is also important, because that's making sure that you're also not becoming a victim. That's why we got some women actually become victims to some dua or shuyukh or whatever it is, because they basically had given these scholars positions that they don't qualify to be in. They basically somehow thought that they were these saints, and then they became an easy victim. Probably another Me Too molested them, and who knows what they did to them. And then they basically said, well, I'm a victim. Here's what happened. Well, why did you give that scholar or that person? Why did you think that they had the right to be with you without a mahram? How did you actually get that close with this person? Well, he's a scholar. Why did you think that this even if he's a scholar, even if he had ilm, did you think that this person, that you can be alone with this person? Did you think that he somehow became beyond a human? And that he's not like any other man to have desire for women, and that he could never in any way transgress the limits with you? What were you doing with this so-called scholar? He's a human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet taught you that you shouldn't be alone with this man. Even if he's a man, why are you holding private conversations with him? How did you become an easy victim? Well, you became an easy victim. Yes, he holds a responsibility, but you also hold a responsibility for being so naive. There you go. And that's the same thing. Yes, he holds a responsibility for being an imposter, but you also hold a responsibility for not verifying that they are actually people of ilm. Boom, right there. You got to do your homework, and they have to do their homework as well. So I hope I answered those questions. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Rabbi yahfadhku ya Rabbi, Rabbi yahfadhku ya Rabbi, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you all and preserve you all. I know we kind of went left and right. I guess, yeah, we went left and right, and going from one thing in one area and then taking us to another. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue the tafsir. We're actually going far, alhamdulillah, right? So we're still in Surah Al-Ma'idah, but we're right now, what, ayah 72? It's pretty good. Pretty good, alhamdulillah. All right. And this is it. Subhanakallahum bihamdik, I guess. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka. Still the same zone, trying to enhance our iman. If anybody would like to unmute themselves, that's also okay too. And inshallah, Rabbi yahfadhku jami'an. And we will, inshallah, see you all tomorrow with the pearls and the tafsir as well.
Wait, isn't that Sunday?
Oh, really? So, is it? I thought it was 2 days. Well, thanks for telling me, Noura.
Wait. Remember, you're a day ahead. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna verify. Just
verify, Noura, because yeah, got my dates wrong, and I'm ready for all. Wallahi al-azim. I'm loving it.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, let's see here.
يا ربي ثبتنا، يا ربي يعطينا الهدى، يعطينا التقى، يعطينا يا ربي.
يعطيك العافية، يزيدك من علوم يا رب.
Fridays and Sundays. Oh yeah,
so
tomorrow.
I'm right.
You
okay. I'm right. نورة شككتيني في حال الله يهديك. I swear to God. Wait a minute.
Oh, subhanallah.
Alhamdulillah. I'm still young. There you go.
Believe that.
والله شككتني في حالي.
We all make those mistakes on days and time.
Okay. For a second, I was like, oh man, I'm losing it already.